right, let's do it. Let's dinosaur. Welcome everybody to the Honors College sneak preview of our spring 2023 signature seminar, Dinosaurs. The full title is The Science, Politics, and Culture of Dinosaurs. And in the Honors College, we know that our rock star faculty have so many amazing things to say about their research fields that we like to make sure we invite community members, alumni, faculty, anybody who is interested in the subject. For the students, remember you need to apply to get a seat in Dinosaurs in the spring semester in our signature seminar. And we do this because we want to get a table around Professor Suarez that's full of engineers, architects, artists, geoscientists, you name it. We want a multidisciplinary seminar table. My name is Linda Kuhn. I'm Dean of the Honors College, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, dazzling, amazing, effervescent Celina Suarez, Queen of Dinosaurs, who is an absolutely brilliant paleochemist who's been tracking dinosaurs her entire life, whether in fossil form or bones, and imagining their feathers, conducting research on dinosaurs across the globe, not only in the US, but in China, in Europe, and South Africa, and much more, who is going to do a 360-degree evaluation of dinosaurs for y'all, which is what we like in a signature seminar. How do we represent them in art? What's the old fossil trade? What are the relationships between what we know about dinosaurs and climate change? How does this paleontologist's desire to find and track dinosaurs affect Native communities? This is such a broad-ranging, brilliant subject that many of us love from childhood and many of us still love, but I would venture to say we don't really know that much about it. So in true Honors College style, I bring to you a guru of dinosaurs whose research has been funded by all the bright and prestigious places, and who is a prolific scholar of dinosaurs and also a very strong supporter of getting more diverse researchers into this vibrant field. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, the outstanding Celina Suarez. Take it away.
Okay, I'll share screen here. And you're looking probably at my Zoom. So here. And okay.
Yep, got it.
Good. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Linda, for such a nice introduction. Yeah, so I'm honored and privileged by the Honors College to be asked to teach the signature seminar series class. And when Linda first came to me with the idea of teaching this class, my brain started spinning wildly about how to present the multidisciplinary topics that go into teaching dinosaur paleontology, because it's more than just the science. There are all kinds of different interweaving issues that come into dinosaur paleontology. So hopefully this presentation provides just a small little snippet or sampling of how I hope the class will work out. And before we begin here, just to talk a little bit about this art here. This is an artist rendition of Arkansas's Friday, the state dinosaur of Arkansas, by Brian Eng. And you'll see a little bit of Brian's work throughout the presentation. He's one of my favorite paleo artists, very accomplished and a very hardworking paleo artist. So we'll talk a little bit about paleo art as well today. So dinosaurs spur the imagination. They reveal to us a world that is very different than our own, but yet similar, because they obviously existed where we are standing at one point. It's kind of like an alternative reality or a different dimension of the Earth. And in them, we see a lost world, kind of like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book describes. But they also offer us an opportunity to reveal a little bit about the Earth system and how Earth has changed over time. They will help us understand a little bit about different cultures and how different cultures react to their environment. In the class, we'll also investigate a little bit about the historical nature of dinosaurs and the prehistoric past. And hopefully in studying these broad topics can help us understand kind of where we're going in the future. So I envision this class to cover about 3 main broad topics. First, the science of dinosaurs, how we know what we know about them, their origin, the evolution of dinosaurs, how we know that how they moved, so a little bit of biomechanics, what color were they, and how did climate affect their evolution over time, and vice versa, how did their evolution over time interact with the climate. From there, I kind of want to go into a little bit about the politics and history of dinosaur paleontology, how manifest destiny opened the doorway for American scientists to become highlighted throughout the world, but may have also, you know, in the rat race of capitalism, may have doomed some of the preeminent paleontologists early on from support from the federal government for their research. In this vein, we can talk a little bit about public funding of science and public funding of science education. We can talk a little bit about land use policy. There's all kinds of complicated issues with land use policy and finding fossils on federal land, state land, private land, land managed by the National Park Service, land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. So there's all kind of interesting issues that come into that as well. And then we can also talk a little bit about the culture of dinosaurs, how Native Americans depicted dinosaurs in their creation stories, a little bit about how modern events during various time periods affected the popular media and depiction of dinosaurs in the media, how paleo artists work with scientists to create dinosaurs, how their different mediums have affected how paleo artists reconstruct dinosaurs. And then we can also talk a little bit about the depiction of scientists or the depiction of paleontologists, the public perception of who is a paleontologist. And then we can also talk then a little bit about modern cultural exchange. Dinosaurs existed on all of the continents because they were all used to be together in one giant supercontinent. But dinosaurs exist in all of the different continents. And so that means scientists from across the world study them. And that can help offer a little bit of cultural exchange with other researchers from different countries, which is kind of one of the favorite parts of my job is meeting other fellow paleontologists who have a passion for dinosaurs, but come from very different backgrounds. So that's kind of a broad overview of that. So I'll go through a few little snippets of the science, kind of some up and coming science and techniques for paleontology, because I would say paleontology and dinosaur paleontology in particular is kind of undergoing a renaissance of research because there are all kinds of new techniques being associated with dinosaur paleontology. So it's not just digging up the bones, cleaning them up and sticking them in a drawer and describing the bones and moving on. Scientists now are really starting to use a variety of different techniques. And so you don't actually have to be a paleontologist. You can be a physicist, you can be a chemist, you can be an artist and study dinosaurs. And in that, this picture here of, oops, is my laser pointer. There we go. This picture here is also work by Brian Eng, and it's actually from an actual publication, a journal publication that was on the brain case of this organism, Dinosaurus. It's a type of tyrannosaur. And in the study of that brain case, they were looking at the venation and the concentration of venation in the brain case and found that they were highly vascularized around the brain. And so this is supposed to be like a thermal image of a setting in the Cretaceous of Dinosaurus with a couple Deinosuchuses around the ceratopsian here munching down. So dinosaurs evolved 235 million years ago. They evolved in the southern hemisphere. The oldest dinosaurs are from the East Gualaceo Formation of Argentina, and this is Eoraptor here, a small theropod. More recently in the news, one of the first or oldest sauropodomorph, which is kind of the ancestors to the big long-necked dinosaurs here, Biosaurus rathai, was found in Zimbabwe recently. And the Earth back in that time was very different than what we see today. So we see this big supercontinent of Pangaea. All of the continents are kind of squished together. You can see in this rendition, there's probably some very significant latitudinal gradients in climate as well. Dinosaurs existed for 164 million years. And that in our spiral of time here is this little bit here. So they existed in the Mesozoic era, which is broken up into 3 periods, the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And dinosaurs first came on the scene kind of in the late part of the Triassic. And during that time period, the Earth changed. During this 164 million years, Earth changed dramatically. So here's a quick little video of, let's turn off this guy, turn off laser pointer, of the Earth starting around 240 million years ago. And during this time period, Pangaea, near around 200 million years ago, started to break up. There were massive volcanic eruptions during that time period that greatly altered climate and may have helped dinosaurs come to dominate the Earth. By the Jurassic period, the plates are starting to rapidly move apart from each other. And then once we get into the early part of the Cretaceous, coming up here, South America and Africa start to split up from each other. And at that point, there's more volcanic eruptions. Right up there. And then by the Cretaceous, in the middle part of the Cretaceous, the volcanic eruptions here, it released a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, caused global warming, caused sea level to rise, and North America was split into 3 different subcontinents, Lauramidia and Appalachia. And so all of this climate change also affected dinosaur paleontology. And we'll just pause here just at the end of the Cretaceous. And then at the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, massive asteroids smashed into the Yucatan Peninsula and basically killed most of the non-avian dinosaurs. And when the non-avian dinosaurs became extinct, they left behind descendants that evolved to become one of the most successful vertebrate organisms to ever exist, and that is in the form of birds. So birds are avian dinosaurs, and they occupy all different ecospaces across the globe. They fly, they swim, they waddle like penguins, they run like ostriches. Some of their extinct relatives reached almost the size of their predecessors, the dinosaurs, like some of these big terror birds from South America. And so how do we know about the ancestors of these birds, the non-avian dinosaurs? And there's a lot of amazing new research and frontiers in research that are happening. So we go through a couple of those as we go. But birds are, as you know, dinosaurs. So this cute little guy here, in my vein flows the blood of dinosaurs. So here's one example of how modern technology is helping dinosaur paleontology. What you can see here is a cute little clutch of Masospondylus eggs. And you can see one of the embryos here, this little baby Masospondylus. And in this work, these are some Masospondylus. Masospondylus is a small sauropodomorph. So again, these are like ancestors to the big long-necked dinosaurs like Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus. And in this study by Kimmy Chappell, she CT scanned these eggs. One of them was prepared, but the rest of the eggs were left intact and scanned. And by using these eggs and a number of other different specimens of older age, she was able to look at the ossification history of these baby mesospondyle and reconstruct how these organisms grow. You can also use chemistry of dinosaur remains to tell you a little bit about the world they lived in and the ecology in which they live in. I myself am a chemist, so I use a lot of different types of chemical techniques. In this paper by Tom Cullen, we are looking at an ecosystem from the late Cretaceous. And in this study, he uses the strontium isotopic ratio of tooth enamel, the oxygen isotopic composition of tooth enamel, and the carbon isotopic composition of tooth enamel to reconstruct ecological interactions between the different organisms. So for example, strontium here is a proxy for migration. Oxygen isotopic composition is a proxy for what you drink, and carbon isotopic composition is a proxy for what you eat. So you are what you eat and drink. And so in this study, he kind of used it to show that, for example, hadrosaurs and tyrannosaurs were not really occupying the same ecospace, that tyrannosaurs drank water that was very different from the rest of these organisms, or more likely they got a lot of their body water from the organisms that they ate. And that tyrannosaurs here ate kind of all of these different things like the ankylosaurs, ceratopsians, and hadrosaurs. All from the chemical composition of the teeth or bones of these different organisms. Interested in biomechanics or mechanical engineering, we can do that too. So in this paper by Paul Bishop, we can see that by scanning bones, looking at muscle attachments here, you can then digitize the bones and reconstruct them. You can reconstruct the muscle attachments, figure out the different forces on the different bones, and 3D model and run in a simulation of how the organism would have moved, their locomotor biomechanics. So again, kind of modern technology in much greater detail, investigating things that, 100 years ago wouldn't have been able to be investigated. And then some looking at SEM and synchrotron spectroscopy. In this paper from Lee et al., we can look at the coloration of feathers of birds and dinosaurs. So feathers have these little structures in them called melanosomes. The shape and size and concentration of melanosomes within the feather can give an indication of the color, or at least the shading of the feather. And so in this example, this is a small little dinosaur, Anchiornis huxleyi, very beautifully preserved. You can see the feathers here. Here are the legs with some feathers coming off of it. Here's an arm. Here's an arm too. Oh, sorry, those are the arms. It's kind of hard to see them. But from this study and the SEM's imaging of this, they came up with a reconstruction of the coloration of the feathers to look like this, which is pretty amazing. And then we can use dinosaurs as part of climate science. And this is because dinosaurs lived during a greenhouse world, which is a world we're rapidly accelerating to. So their occurrences, where they existed, where they didn't exist, can help us understand their reaction to climate change and how like the ecosystem and biota can react to climate change. So for example, climate most likely played a role in the expansion of dinosaurs after the end-Triassic mass extinction. So the end-Triassic mass extinction was about 201 million years ago, and likely related to massive volcanic eruptions as Pangea here was splitting into two. And if you look at this graph here, you can see this is a phylogenetic tree, so it's kind of like a tree of life of dinosaurs, if you will. And there's a decent number of organisms here, but after this point at the end Triassic mass extinction event, we have a huge diversity of dinosaurs evolving. And this rifting of Pangea released around 17,000 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. On the short term, it may have resulted in cooling because of release of sulfur dioxide and ash, but those things have very short residence time in the atmosphere. The longer term effect of these eruptions were likely greenhouse warming. And so this destabilization between cooling and warming may have destabilized the ecosystem and allowed dinosaurs, which were to a certain degree homeothermic, or were at least able to control their body temperature to a certain extent over their predecessors, may have allowed them to take over ecosystems at the end of the Triassic. So what are some potential science questions we can talk about in the science portion of the course? What are frontier questions in dinosaur paleontology? What are like new techniques that are being used for studying dinosaurs? I know people are even doing things like machine learning, for example, and paleontology. How can we use dinosaur record to understand the Earth system that we know of? How do we know what dinosaurs look like? How did they move? Why did they get so big? What adaptations do they need to get so big? And then like, how did dinosaurs come to dominate the Mesozoic at the end of the Triassic? All right, so this moves me then into kind of politics and the history of science, at least dinosaur paleontology science. Before we go too far into that, it's important to note that dinosaurs were known by many cultures before quote unquote Western civilizations or the scientific study of dinosaurs came to be. Many creation myths likely incorporated fossils within them. So for example, the depiction of dragons in Chinese culture was almost certainly related to the discovery of dinosaur bones within China, and China has a wonderful dinosaur record. Similarly, the Thunderbird or Thunderbird type organisms in Native American cultures may likely have been derived from discovery of various fossils. But in 1840, if we go towards this first described Western civilization description of dinosaurs, in 1840, Sir Richard Owen coined the term dinosaur, which means terrible lizard in Latin. And then only a short 19 years later, Charles Darwin published on the origin of the species by means of natural selection. And so, you know, this idea that there were these major transitions in organisms over time happened within a short amount of historical time in the science community. And then only a short 10 years after that publication, the Civil War ended, and post-Civil War, the US aimed to expand and acquire resources in the newly reunited country. So in 1867, Congress authorized geological explorations out west in a number of different surveys: the King Survey, the Hayden Survey, the Powell Survey, the Wheeler Survey. One of the more famous surveys of those was the Powell Survey, which was headed by John Wesley Powell, seen here, overlooking the Virgin River with one of the Paiute chiefs, Taugu. And you can see he explored the Colorado River. This is one of the maps that he made, and was exploring both the geology, the and the kind of like the anthropology of some of the Native Americans in the area. And the goal of these surveys was to identify and secure resources for the US. And this was partially motivated by the idea of manifest destiny, the idea that the US, and more particularly white males, were destined by God to expand and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. Ironically, it is this idea that may have come to doom the two most preeminent scientists at the time, Othniel Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. So Cope was affiliated with the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. He was born to a rich Quaker family and was considered kind of like a gentleman naturalist or a gentleman scientist, studying the science just for the purpose of studying the science of paleontology. Marsh, on the other hand, was the son of a farmer, but his uncle was a wealthy person, George Peabody, who took interest in him and ended up sending him for education in Europe. And the name Peabody should ring a bell because if you ever go to Yale University, the Yale Peabody Museum is named after George Peabody. And they met in 1863, managed to miss the Civil War, and they met in Berlin, and their initial relationship was good. So much so that Cope actually took Marsh out to New Jersey mineral quarry where Laelops and Hadrosaurus were discovered. But eventually Marsh makes a deal with the owners of the mine to send him all of the bones that they find rather than Cope. Obviously, this would have ruffled Cope's feathers. He felt somewhat betrayed by bringing somebody out to this place who, they're digging up bones and sharing it with them. But Marsh considers this business as usual, right? I made him a better offer than you did. Capitalism. And so this was the start of the unraveling of their relationship. And then Cope makes a very famous error by putting the skull of this organism here. This is a plesiosaur, a swimming reptile called Elasmosaurus. Put the skull on the wrong end of this specimen. He actually put it on the tail. So this is the incorrect configuration. This is the correct configuration. And Marsh just let him have it publicly. And so pretty much their relationship was toast. And so Marsh first goes out west because he's hearing these reports from John Wesley Powell and other of the surveys about this vast desert that houses a multitude of rocks. Out east, there's so many plants in the way you can only find vertebrate remains of dinosaur Mesozoic age, usually within quarries. But out west, the advantage is it's dry and those rocks are exposed at the surface. So Marsh first goes out west with the expansion and the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad to go see what's out there in about 1868. Cope soon follows. And then one of Marsh's advantages is that he befriends John Wesley Powell, who is now the newly minted head of the United States Geological Survey, which is a division of the Department of Interior. And since he makes kind of a deal with John Wesley Powell that he should be his paleontologist, so he becomes the first head of the Department of Paleontology of the USGS. And with that comes somewhat unlimited federal funding to excavate all of these different places and let the war begin, because evidently the West was not big enough for these two guys. So a lot of stuff happens. We can go into it in the class, but basically they both try to outcompete each other. They end up naming new species from a number of different organisms, or a single organism, and naming a number of different species. So for example, this is Uintatherium. It's a type of mammal. And it was named Dinosaurs by Marsh. I think it actually is known by like 3 or 4 other names because they were just naming little bits and pieces of the organism and trying to get as many publications out and outcompete each other. They went so far as to destroying quarry sites, competing quarry sites. So Cope would excavate a quarry site and tell his guys, blow up the quarry so that Marsh doesn't come back in our off season to come and steal some of these bones. The idea being that my competitor's failure is my success. So capitalism, anyone? This culminates then in 1890 in a series of public feud that is played out in the paper of the New York Herald, in which each of them accuse each other of plagiarism, mismanagement of federal funds, etc. Well, Congress gets a hold of this, obviously trying, they tend to not want to waste money. And a senator from Alabama, Senator Hillary Hubert, asked, why are we funding research on birds with teeth? Because at this time, I think Marsh was getting funding to publish a paper on some of these Cretaceous birds that still had teeth. Very important specimen when it comes to evolution and paleontology and the science, but Congress did not want to pay for that. So the USGS funding is slashed, and the Department of Paleontology is eliminated from the USGS. And to this day, there is no Department of Paleontology with the USGS. They do employ some paleontologists, but they are not part of a Department of Paleontology. So good job, guys. And then this brings me to a little bit about dinosaurs and capitalism. One of the big topics out there in controversies, especially amongst paleontologists, is the sale of fossils, particularly dinosaur fossils. Should they be sold? Is it ethically sound? A lot of this was popularized by the incidents of Sue the T-Rex, which you can see is now housed at the Chicago Field Museum. It's a beautiful specimen. It was like 80% complete, I think. And it was discovered by a private collector on land leased to that collector by a Sioux landowner whose land itself was actually held by a federal trust. So all kinds of land use issues there. In the long, and we can talk a little bit about the court cases that ensued from this, anybody interested in law. But in the long run, the private collector was able to sell the specimen at Sotheby's. It ended up being sold for $8.4 million, which for many paleontologists was like one of the worst things to happen, because then every Joe Schmo was digging up their backyard or digging in federal property to find dinosaurs to strike it rich. Luckily, in this instance, the material went to a museum, so people can still see it, but it didn't leave a very good precedent. Another example of this is the sale of this organism, a Tarbosaurus bataar, which is a Mongolian tyrannosaur. That also added an international law to this whole complex issue of selling of dinosaur fossils. In the end, for this one, this particular fossil of Tarbosaurus ended up going back to Mongolia, was repatriated back to Mongolia, but it was brought to the US by a fossil collector and dealer from Florida. So that ended up being an interesting story as well. And this can bring us now to like some land use policy. So, you know, you can dig up a dinosaur fossil in your backyard, and if it's on your own private land, that's totally legal in the US. This is not the case internationally. For example, in Mongolia, you can't just dig up a dinosaur in your backyard. It belongs to Mongolia. You can't sell it. And so in the US, paleontologists had this big push back in the early 2000s to give some teeth to protecting dinosaur resources on federal land. And this is in the form of the Paleontological Resource Preservation Act, which was signed by President Obama in 2009. And in this act, it creates dinosaur fossils as a particular resource which needs special protection. And as a result, in order to excavate dinosaur fossils on federal land, you must have a permit and you must be qualified to do so. On state land, however, anything goes. It depends on the state. Some states don't even have actual laws about collecting vertebrate fossils. So this is an interesting also area of discussion, because even within federal land, there's different rules for, say, National Park Service land, BLM land, Forest Service land, land managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. There's all kinds of different policies that go with those different federal lands. So this then brings me to some of the questions that we can ask when we're looking at dinosaurs, politics, history, capitalism. So should the government fund and support dinosaur research? They sort of do in funding from the National Science Foundation. Should dinosaur remains from outside the country be allowed to be sold in the US? Should the sale of fossils, particularly dinosaur fossils, be allowed? Some people say, well, it's totally legal. You can sell it. Why not? Paleontologists obviously really hate that, because then it can't be studied. And actually, even just recently, there's a very complete specimen of Tyrannosaurus rex from the Hell Creek Formation that is being sold in Hong Kong next month. How is the history of westward expansion? How did that affect the role of government on science research? How should scientific standards, should there be scientific standards for public science education? So you could start getting into, the teaching of evolution in science classes, and like the whole, court hearing in Dover, Pennsylvania. How should federal land use policy be governed with respect to scientific research? So for example, if you go to federal land like Bureau of Land Management land, if I want to do any type of science on that land and want to collect even just rocks or fossils, I have to put in a permit. However, you can, as a private citizen, as a collector, collect up to 25 pounds of rocks or fossils, not vertebrate fossils, but rocks or fossils, without any permit. So there you go. All right, and then we can talk a little bit about dinosaurs and culture. So many native peoples have myths that almost certainly were inspired by various types of fossils, and for sure for dinosaur fossils as well. Paleontologists, especially early paleontologists, assumed that native peoples just could not or did not recognize them for what they were. But this is probably not true. And this is kind of expressed well in this quote from Lame Deer, a Lakota holy man, who said, "What you people call fossils, these too are used by us. Deep in the Badlands, we find the bones of the water monster, which lived long before human beings appeared." And so just their observations of seeing fossils in the land and knowing that they no longer live today, these native peoples had a very good concept of time, that these organisms lived a long time ago, maybe didn't know how long, but they lived a long time ago, no longer live today. And so that things change over time. An example of this is one of the creation stories for the Lakota Sioux, where the rivers were inhabited by water monsters that were then killed by the Thunderbird, who used lightning, which today is now preserved as these stone spears. Well, these stone spears may likely have been these things, which are fossils. These are belemnites, which are a type of ancient squid. There are many fossils in the high plains. Most of them are exposed in cut banks of rivers. So those could have been the bones of water monsters. And dinosaur footprints are preserved within the Badlands, which which the Lakota Sioux may have used as example of the Thunderbird. Another example is in Mexico and South America. So the Aztec creation god Quetzalcoatl defeated sea monsters and water monsters. And Quetzalcoatl is often depicted as like this combination of a serpent and bird and jaguar. And there's a myth about a location that Quetzalcoatl goes to rest that is called Tamapaco, which is from Nahuatl means impression of the hands. So maybe this was a track site. There are track sites within Mexico that you can see. And the location for where Quetzalcoatl's origin was in the northern part of Mexico and the southwest of America, or the US, what is today the US. And that is the location that giant pterodactyls have been found. And fittingly, the giant pterodactyl that has been found in the Badlands, or the Big Bend area of Texas, was named Quetzalcoatlus North in honor of the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. So certainly some interesting avenues of research that we can get into when it comes to culture, different cultures' perception of dinosaurs. As far as popular media depiction of dinosaurs, the first full reconstruction of a dinosaur was in 1854 at Crystal Palace in London. But for the most part, dinosaurs remained like a topic for the elite to ponder. The general public didn't really care. But in the late 1800s to early 1900s, the renewed exploration of the American West and this popularization of the frontier and exploration, and a desire from the public to move on from the Civil War, kind of perked the interest of the general public. And this was also amplified by some of Marsh's students, some of these students here, who ironically had never been out West and probably had never carried a gun in their life. But they were some students whose parents paid Marsh to take them out West and have an adventure. And they were popularized by a series of articles written by one of the students in Harper's Magazine. So people were reading this and reading this idea of this going out West and exploring. And then finally, the public feud between Cope and Marsh obviously, popularized dinosaurs to people. But the first public or publications of very dynamic portrayals of dinosaurs came with the art of Charles Knight. And this is one of Charles Knight's paintings from the late 1800s. Charles Knight actually worked with Cope some to looked at the bones, reconstructed bones, and tried to depict dinosaurs as rather than lumbering or like animals, but as dynamic, moving, fast-moving organisms. And then the publication of The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle, which was eventually made into a movie, also started to popularize dinosaurs. Eventually, the widespread use of film increased the popularity of dinosaurs. Post-World War I and World War II, a renewed interest of dinosaurs was expressed as monsters, especially with added fears of the atomic bomb during the Cold War. So for example, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and Godzilla all are kind of related to like atomic accidents. An exception to that, though, is the depiction of dinosaurs in Disney's Fantasia, one of my favorites, to the music of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and that's this picture here. And interestingly, the depiction of dinosaurs here throughout the piece is dinosaurs being affected by climate over time, which is really interesting because climate kind of helped that, like rapid climate change helped them evolve into being successful organisms for so long, but then also killed them with the rapid climate change as a result of the asteroid impact. And then finally, by the 1980s and 90s, this question about the ethical nature of genetics weaved its way into the novel by Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park. And with that, dinosaurs became wildly popular. And with it came a drive to capitalize on that popularity. And so, for example, the Jurassic Park franchise is worth billions of dollars. I actually don't know the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it's close on the billions. So this brings me to artists, because part of the reason why Jurassic Park was so successful, especially as a movie, was like CGI reconstruction of dinosaurs. So dinosaurs would not be as popular as they are today without the work of paleo artists, starting with the work by Charles Knight to the modern CGI revolution and improvements in various art techniques and media types. These have all revolutionized how both scientists and the public sees dinosaurs. So paleo art is kind of like its own profession. It is its own profession and subset of paleontology. And in fact, actually, the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology gives several art awards every year. So how do paleo artists work today? Well, paleo artists do a lot of research with scientists as well. That's part of the reason why I like a lot of the work that Brian Eng does is, and this is from his website, don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com, is he works a lot with scientists, and not just the paleontologists studying the dinosaurs themselves. He works with geologists and paleobotanists to reconstruct, climatologists to reconstruct the world that the organisms live in. So and this is kind of like his notes as he's going through working on a commissioned piece from the Museum of Western Science. And he's working on a landscape for dinosaurs that are preserved within a rock formation called the Menifee Formation. And so, for example, this is like a figure from a scientific publication that shows the different facies or depositional environments that are preserved within the Menifee Formation. And so he changes this then into a different kind of landscape. He does some doodling and some pencil sketching just to get an idea of the different areas and depositional environments in which he's going to put his dinosaurs into. And then I'll show this video. We won't go through the whole thing, but this video of kind of how Brian works through doing this art in a minute.
Check these guys out. We're here at the Western Science Center, and we are working on a giant Cretaceous jungle mural for a new exhibit based on the stuff the Western Science Center has been finding in the Menifee Formation in New Mexico. We got Tut Tran right here, just painting like crazy, paleontologist and paleo artist. We got Jeremy Owen over here on these trees in the corner. So we are now almost done with the middle ground of this giant Menifee mural. And as you can see, the detail is going pretty deep. I have to finish these ornatopses. We got the baby guy right here. Tut's gonna be working on adding some moss and ferns to this giant cryptomeria.
All right, this goes on for like 10 minutes. We'll go on. All right, so yeah, paleo artists, they are pretty awesome. And then this brings me kind of the image of a scientist, the image of paleontologists. And the initial kind of practice or study of paleontology was practiced by gentlemen naturalists, basically, people that had the time and money to do so. The popularization of exploration of the American West and the Bone Wars made this depiction of paleontologists being these rugged conquerors, or conquerors moving out west, the rugged male conquering the desert. And this image of paleontologists kind of persists today, in part because minority populations, especially populations from lower income, don't see vertebrate paleontology as a valid profession, or you know, a profession to really pursue. You know, it was always be a doctor or be a lawyer. You know, certainly my grandparents thought I was absolutely insane with all the education that I was doing. Why are you going out digging holes? We don't do that anymore. That's what we did so that you didn't have to do this. And to a certain extent, accessing paleontology was kind of something that upper class or more privileged students could access. But that perception is very much changing, and there's a big concerted effort in the paleontological community to change this perception, especially like societies like the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. So for example, there's this initiative called the Bearded Lady Project that photographs female paleontologists both in the field and in the lab. You don't have to go into the field to go into vertebrate paleontology. And a lot of concerted effort by a lot of brave and ingenious new young researchers. So for example, these ladies here are part of Dr. Hisham Salam's students from Mansoura University in Cairo, who his group is the first actual paleontology department within Egypt. And his first cohort of students were all female, all these ladies. I actually met some of these ladies out in Utah before. And it was very challenging for them because even he had this perception that these female scientists wouldn't be able to do the work. But in fact, he proved them wrong, which he freely admits, and were part of the first Egyptian group to be an Egyptian-based science group to excavate and name a dinosaur from Egypt. So different culture questions we can tackle as part of kind of this broad umbrella of dinosaurs and culture, or what are the early depictions of dinosaurs and who's receiving them? How are they received by different cultures? How did the westward expansion of the American West affect the perceived image of dinosaurs and the perceived image of paleontologists? How did historical events, such as the Civil War, the Cold War, World War I and II, affect the depiction of dinosaurs in popular media? How do paleo artists bring dinosaurs to life, and how have their techniques changed? And then who is dinosaur research for, dinosaur paleontology research for? It's starting to become broader for people from different backgrounds, but there's still work to do. So how is this class going to run? I'm hoping to cover these broad topics in a little bit more detail, kind of these broad umbrella of politics and history and culture and the science itself. And then hopefully we'll present questions and avenues of research for the different students that are within the class, not just the science students. And then hopefully we can create projects based around different areas of interest. And then hopefully by the end of the class, we can all kind of share our work of what we come up with throughout the course of the class. So hopefully that was a good little snippet on kind of what I imagine the class to be, and I'm happy to take any questions.